relation to the ongoing and unfolding migration crisis in the Mediterranean, I very much thought of your work on the politics of pity, and we're seeing a lot of the politics of pity perhaps coming out in the current discourses and practices of security, humanitarianism and so on in the Mediterranean. It's been quite some time since you wrote that piece. How would you see that work as being relevant to the current situation?
I've actually got reminded of my work on trafficking very recently, reading a short piece written by Martina Tazzioli on border deaths, which is coming out in Radical Philosophy, actually. And I think the piece was echoing some of the arguments that I made back in 2004 and in 2008, because in a sense we see, and she showed how we see the emergence of a scene of rescue, where, you know, there's the same time a humanitarian discourse, which is a discourse of governing and counting, and how you draw the lines, and whom you save and whom you don't, and which institutions are deployed, and how all these technologies and institutions are being assembled. But it is a discourse that has a whole series of limits that we don't talk about. Very important limits. So on the one hand, one of the questions that I asked in my book in 2008 around human trafficking was, how come when we talk about victims of trafficking, and again we have the debate about trafficking, for instance, in the Mediterranean as well, and Libyan smugglers and so on and so forth, how come we never talk about it in terms of freedom, in terms of their freedom? We always talk about it in terms of pity, of saving, of the violence that's done to victims of trafficking. What would it mean to actually think about these problems also in terms of freedom? What would it mean to shift the lens? The second, I think, question that's relevant to the question of migration and what's going on in the Mediterranean today, from my earlier work on human trafficking, is exactly the question around the limits of the politics of pity. So on the one hand, the politics of pity projects and fosters a particular imaginary of the victim, who is therefore not the free subject.
Right, yes.
But also it assumes a moment of salvage, a moment of saving. So the question I asked when I was researching human trafficking is, what happens afterwards? And we know what happens. A sort of triage happens in which very few people actually, get a chance to be granted refugee status or have some other form of subsidiary protection, where the aim is to actually return people, to actually deport them.
Right, yes.
So how do we think, about what is happening after this moment of saving, and how do we think about, the imaginary of the victim?
Absolutely, yes.
But how this imaginary is also the effect of particular practices is another side to the question that we need to think about. How, migrants are not... So migrants are represented as, in a sense, almost entrepreneurial migrants who take the risks and are ready to set their lives, at risk to actually cross the Mediterranean and reach Europe. But of course, again, the other side to that is that this is the result of practices of borders at a distance, as you know very well, the result of visa regime, the increasing attempt to push people and restrict the ways in which people can move.
Absolutely, it forces people into irregular routes of migration, and thence they have to take the risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have known this for a long time, so I'm still amazed at how little attention is paid to things we have known for many years.
Absolutely.
There's been a lot of research done on this.
I think that's fascinating, and it certainly seems to suggest something that comes up in my own work, which is actually a very counterintuitive moment of understanding, where fundamental rights discourses and the politics of pity shut down mobility. They're really used to shut down mobility. And I'm reminded of Jenny Holzer, the artist, who said, protect me from what I want. and protecting migrants from their own mobility and the potential for exploitation that is seen to come either in sexual terms through trafficking or in the labour market, which is used by the EU amongst other actors to shut down mobility, whereas actually improved or strengthened border controls can counterintuitively free up mobility by providing the ways to manage regular migration. And so this may be a way to actually address some of the issues that you're talking about. Thank you very much for talking to us today and for coming to visit our centre, and we hope that you'll be a future reader of our journal, New Perspectives, as well. So thank you very much indeed, Claudia Aradau.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you, Ben.
Thank you.